Checking audio. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Back to you. Uy, may feedback. Oo. Ayun. No, I don't hear it from my earpiece. Mm-hmm.
Mental emphasis, Song Kulong Ujo from
Yes.
2021, which because of the coronavirus had to migrate to an online Song Kulong Ujo.
Yep.
mediated ethnobotany, preserving and through media-based interventions. My name is John Ryan, affiliated with Southern Cross University and the My name
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Okay, so it is 102. I think we can start the panel presentation. Welcome.
Okay,
Good
so,
afternoon, everyone.
it is
And welcome to panel
102.
one.
I think we
I think I
Hello everyone. I hope you all can hear me. Apologies for the slight delay. We're waiting for the other speaker, but I suppose we can already start because Professor Janice Morales is here. So perhaps we can start with her. And so by way of introducing our session today, I hope you're all doing well wherever you are. So welcome to panel 2 of the breakout sessions in this third international conference on Cordillera Studies. The theme of our panel is Indigenous Peoples and Sustainable Development Goals in Southeast Asian Media. My name is Roland Rabang of the College of Arts and Communication of the University of the Philippines, Baguio, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's session. We have 2 speakers of note for this panel. One of them is already here. And according to our conference procedures, the first presenter shall be introduced. This will be followed by his or her PowerPoint presentation. Then after the first PowerPoint presentation, the second speaker will be introduced, followed by his PowerPoint presentation. After the presentations, I will provide a summary of the presentations, then an open forum follows. You may use the group chat feature of our Zoom meeting to write your questions, or the raise hand button if you wish to speak directly to our speakers. Although our participants in the other platforms, such as Facebook or YouTube, can perhaps send in their questions too through the messaging features of these platforms. Please identify yourself and your institution or organizational affiliation for record purposes. And as always, please keep your questions short and concise so that we may accommodate more questions and discussions as our time may allow. May I please also remind the participants as well to fill out the evaluation forms for the conference. The evaluation links, however, will be posted on the last day of the conference, and we will issue certificates of participation as soon as these evaluation forms are accomplished. That said, it is my honor to introduce our speakers for this session. Our first speaker is Professor Janice Z. Morales. She's a faculty at the Department of Social Sciences, Central Luzon State University. She earned her degree in her BA in Social Sciences at the University of the Philippines, Baguio in 2001, and her MA in Sociology at University of the Philippines, Diliman in 2011. She's currently a PhD in Sociology candidate at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. She's also part of the Global Academy on Migration and Development. Much of her interest is on identity politics and gender and migration studies. The title of her presentation is Locating the Aita Community in the Development Discourse, an analysis of media representation of IPs in the New Clark City project. The summary of her presentation is, the abstract, I should say, of her presentation is as follows. Media is a powerful institution that may advance or misrepresent people who are constantly marginalized in the development discourse. In 2015, the Basis Conversion and Development Authority, or BCDA, design of the Clark Green City was approved by the Philippine Congress. Now coined New Clark City, it is one of the flagship projects of the current administration, promising a more sustainable and livable city. BCDA Executive Vice President Eileen Zosa described it as a smart, intelligent, green, resilient, future-proof, and socially inclusive metropolis. There is conflicting information in regard to where the Aita community stand in this development project. In an article released in the Philippine Daily Inquirer on July 2019, BCDA said that the project will be beneficial to the IPs living within the area of development. While the proponent declared that there will be no displacement of IPs, they offered 300,000 pesos per hectare to all, including the IPs who will be affected by the project. Guided by Foucault's concept of power and knowledge, this research examines media representations of the Aita community in the new Clark City. Media released from Clark Development Corporation and BCDA, and newspaper clips from leading newspapers from the period of its launching in May 2019 up to the present were used. This study interrogates issues of inclusiveness in development as presented in text. Moreover, it analyzes the tendencies of media as a platform to either give voices to what is consistently being muted or become a tool for making it more invisible in the development discourse. So what follows at this point would be the PowerPoint presentation of Professor Janice Z. Morales.
Locating the Aida community in the development discourse, an analysis of media representation of IPs in the new Clark City project. Good day, my name is Janice Z. Morales. So for the outline of my presentation, first I will provide a brief background of the new Clark City project, and then the methodology that I use for this paper. Third, the discussion of themes that emanates from the data, and lastly, summary and recommendation. The new Clark City is designed to be the first smart, green, and resilient city in the country. The new Clark City project is a 607 billion metropolis under the Build, Build, Build flagship program of the present administration. From the original Clark City in Pampanga, which is only 4,400 hectares, the new Clark City expanded to 9,450 hectares, now covering most area of Bamban and Capas Tarlac. The project is under the supervision of the Basis Conversion Development Authority. Part of the project is the sport facilities used during the 2019 SEA Games. Moreover, 200 hectares will be allotted for the construction of the National Government Administrative Center, or the NGAC. The NGAC will serve as a government hub for the purpose of decongesting Metro Manila. Since most of the national agencies are located in Metro Manila, the plan is to relocate them in the new Clark City. So for the methodology, this paper is actually an offshoot of a previous field research which I did together with my classmates in a graduate course in anthropology. The fieldwork was done in Santa Juliana, Capas Tarlac, where an Aita community is located. However, during that time, because of time constraint, not all secondary materials collected were used. Thus, the idea of doing a separate paper that will only focus on representation was conceptualized. At an initial phase of doing this, I did attempt to go back to the field, but it did not materialize due to the pandemic. Analysis about the situation of the Aita community vis-a-vis the development of the new Clark City will then solely come from the text. This paper is exploratory in nature. It will analyze text using Foucault's concept of power knowledge as a guide and a sensitizing concept. In Foucault's analysis of power knowledge, it is crucial to examine who says what under what circumstances. Moreover, what is included or obliterated or even pacified in text gives us idea about power relation. So, for the analysis of text, I made use of two sets of materials. One, press release of BCDA from June 2018 to August 2019 that has a total of 19 articles. Another are online news from different media outlets from January 2018 to September 2020 that has a total of 12 articles coming from different media outlets. So at an initial phase, I made use of a word generator for coming up with initial codes. And then I will read again the articles to examine. The following: one, differences and representations based on the frequently used words in all materials. Another is the general themes drawn from the text and the competing representations from the different sources. And when I say different sources, I mean BCDA as a source of the press release and the different media outlets for the online news. So this is actually the word list generated by word cloud. So I just picked the top 25 words in the word list. At the left side are the words that came from the BCDA press release, and on the right side are the words that came from articles of the different media outlets. Since the selected articles only pertain to the ITA communities in the New Clark City project, definitely there are a lot of similarities in the word list. But one must pay attention to the frequency and ranking of words. Moreover, there are words in the list from the articles of different media outlets that are not present in the top 25 listed words of the BCDA press releases, as you can see in the highlighted words. No? And these are words such as indigenous, ancestral, and displaced. These can also be visualized by the following word cloud. So this is the word cloud for the two-word list. Notice that the words Aita, displays, ancestral, and communities are not as visible in the BCDA press release compared to the news articles as presented by the circle on the right side. What can be deduced from this simple word generation? Words that are more visible somehow describe the content of the two sets of text. Now, for the general themes drawn from these articles, there are three general themes. One, development as smart, resilient, sustainable, and people-centered. Another is the exclusion and displacement in development. And lastly, security as a component of development. In the 17 global goals set as 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, SDG 11 aims to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. This was the image that one can find in all the press releases of BCDA as the main proponent of the NCC. So the table here would show the difference in terms of how the New Clark City is represented in the press release of the BCDA and from the news coming from different media outlets. In one of the media release dated July 8, 2019, BCDA proclaimed that the new Clark City will be the most inclusive and sustainable city in the country. Among what is envisioned are the following. One, that it will be a green city with 60% green and open spaces. It will be um, a place where there is improved access and connectivity, and that the indigenous peoples and farmers will benefit from the project. However, in a research done by UP and the University of Glasgow, one of the research fellow, Andre Ortega, explained in which the New Clark City is a classic case of development aggression. In the satellite image of Ortega's research team, it showed large farmland were converted into concretes to pave the way for the project. Andre Ortega from the University of Glasgow, who is part of the team that did counter mapping of the terrain, exclaimed that in fact it is a schizophrenic development. While the proponent suggests that the redirecting of rivers done by contractor will maximize its socioeconomic value, the chair of the Department of Geography at UP, Yanni Lopez, believed that the drastic changes will disturb the eco balance. As Ortega also said, no, you are trying to develop a green city by removing the green. So that's how they would represent or describe the new Clark City. The second theme, exclusion displacement in development, according to BCDA, there are no declared ancestral domains or certificates of ancestral domain titles in the area. Thus, Aita families are not displaced. So to simply put, according to BCDA, there is no displacement of the IPs in the new Clark City project. However, when you go over the news, coming from various media outlets, out of the 12 news articles reported cases of displacement and exclusion of the ITAs in the decision-making process of the NCC project. Another, BCD also mentioned in the press releases that there is constant dialogue with the National Commission on Indigenous People and the affected community. However, in the two-part article of Krisha Subing-Subing and Marielo Ramos from the Philippine Daily Inquirer, they elaborated the uprooting of the Hangi tribe as a result of the development of the NCC. The NCC already started even before formal dialogues with the tribe happened. BCDA has yet to initiate a free prior informed consent which is mandated under the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act of 1997. Also in the said article, the application of the Hangi tribe, which was originally filed in 1999, was denied by NCIP. NCIP also support the position of BCDA, stating that there is no certificate of ancestral domain titles application filed in their office. Thus, technically, no ITAs are displaced. So, based from the two government agencies, no ITAs are displaced. Another is um, the issue of giving a 7-day notice for the Aita community because Casimira Maniego, head of the Association of the Katutubo sa Mahawang, said some 500 Aita families in Barangay Aranguren were given the 7-day eviction notice from the CDA. BCDA then clarified that it's a standard follow-up letter sent to all claimants who rejected the financial assistance offered by the government. Now, in terms of the third theme, which is security as a component of development, BCDA also proclaimed that there is security, particularly economic security, as a product of the new Clark City project. According to them, in the project, there would be improved lives of ITAs. In fact, in the phase one of the construction of the new Clark City, more than 300 ITAs were hired, particularly in construction work. Another, there are compensations for those who are affected by the project. BCDA mentioned 300,000 per hectare compensation given to affected of the project. And the relocation will be made available. So this does not coincide or in contradiction with what is represented in the news. So as mentioned by the Mayor of Capas, Reynaldo Katakutan, the dispute actually of ITAS is not with LGU and BCDA, but with the Department of National Defense, since both the community, the ITA community and the DND, are claiming ownership of the land, particularly the area where we went as a class, no, in Santa Juliana, Capas, Tarlac. So you would notice that in the news, uh, it shows representation of insecurity and not security. There's lack of security of land, housing, and livelihood based on the cases that uh, the correspondents from the different media outlets interviewed. And in terms of relocation, there is no mention of where the tribe will be transferred. will be transferred. So even if BCDA mentioned that relocation will be made available, the IPs are not clear or it's uncertain as to where they will be relocated. So in summary, in the power knowledge, Michel Foucault argued that in order for something to be considered as fact in a dominant discourse, other equally valid arguments need to be discredited. Thus, Foucault focused on institutional processes of production of knowledge. This could be found or could be seen when you look at the cases of the IPs in the New Clark City. There is constant invalidation coming from government agencies to the claims and clamor of the ITA communities, particularly in their invisibility in the NCC project. Given that different institutions provide different representations, the one in power can really pacify resistance or make people invisible in the development discourse. In the case of the ITAs in the NCC, the continuous dismissal of NCIP to their land claims make it easy for BCDA to exclude them in the planning and implementation of the project. Sometimes brute force is no longer needed to control the lives of others. Rather, control of information or creation of a different representation. So, for example, enticing the ITAs by giving them temporary jobs in the construction of the new Clark City actually displays the issue of ancestral domain claims. It creates an illusion that there is security in job and in their livelihood. So, for as long as media remains as a channel to communicate resistance and to serve as an amplifier to muted voices, then probably there would still be hope that the patches of resistance among indigenous people can elicit just, inclusive, and sustainable development. So, for my recommendations for future research on this particular topic, the use of mixed methods will provide a better lens in analyzing the displacement and the visibility or invisibility of the IPs. Another, doing a stakeholder analysis will also be helpful in digging deep into the politics of development. So, to conclude, the role of the media as a vanguard for truth is important in the development discourse. Access to information is so crucial in pushing for inclusive and sustainable development. As Foucault posited, it is not possible for power to be exercised without knowledge. It is impossible for knowledge not to engender power. With that, thank you so much. Have a good day.
Okay, thank you very much. That was the presentation of Professor Janice Z. Morales of the Central Luzon State University. Our next presentation will be from Dr. John Charles Ryan. So Dr. Ryan is adjunct associate professor at Southern Cross University and an honorary research fellow at the University of Western Australia and postdoctoral research fellow at the University of New England in Australia. He has published extensively in the fields of environmental writing, critical plant studies, Aboriginal Australian poetry, and Southeast Asian eco-criticism. He is the co-editor of Australian Wetland Cultures, Swamps and the Environmental Crisis, and author of Plants in Contemporary Poetry, Eco-Criticism, and the Botanical Imagination. In 2020, he was writer in residence at Oak Spring Garden Foundation in Virginia and visiting scholar at University of Augustus in Surabaya, Indonesia. The title of his presentation, Mediated Ethnobotany, Preserving Indigenous Cultural Knowledge of Plants in Southeast Asia through Media-Based Interventions. So indigenous peoples can significantly contribute to conserving of Southeast Asia's endangered biodiversity. This assertion is especially relevant to the protection of flora species and rare botanical communities. Although Southeast Asia is known as a global hotspot of plant diversity and endemism, the region is also recognized as the most floristically threatened in the world, with projections up to 98% loss of native forests for parts of the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia in the next decade. This paper examines indigenous Southeast Asian peoples' use of media, including films, music videos, online content, radio programs, and other forms to facilitate the preservation of flora and the conservation of culture. The idea of mediated ethnobotany is formulated to signify the indigenous people's use of media to preserve and disseminate traditional biocultural knowledge of plants. Case studies from Malaysia, Myanmar, and Thailand will illustrate the concept of mediated ethnobotany. In Malaysia, for instance, there is a shift in the role of the indigenous Semai people of Ulu Gero in northern Perak state from gathering buds of the corpse flower Rafflesia as a traditional wound healing agent to acting as environmental custodians of the species and ecotourism guides. The latter is done through their interaction with media and creation of media products. In Myanmar, moreover, Chin poet Mia Caviar advocates the protection of the biocultural diversity of the Chin Hills Range through a reflexive movement between traditional print-based and emerging digital forms of poetry practice. Finally, the hill tribes of northern Thailand reconfigured the ancient wisdom of traditional ceremonies in media contexts as a means to promote the protection of the remaining teak forests of the region. The mediated ethnobotany of indigenous Southeast Asian peoples provides a vital platform for preserving, promoting, and perpetuating biocultural knowledge that is becoming increasingly imperiled in an age of ecological catastrophe. So what follows now will be the presentation of Dr. Ryan.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak on the topic of mediated ethnobotany, preserving indigenous cultural knowledge of plants in Indonesia through media-based interventions. My name is John Ryan, affiliated with Southern Cross University and the Nalungu Institute, University of Notre Dame, Australia. I open here with 3 images of the Tenggeris people, an ethnic minority group based in Eastern Java, specifically around Bromo National Park, and for whom plants of various kinds form an integral part of cultural traditions. I'll open the presentation with the questions, what is ethnobotany and what is mediated ethnobotany? Before introducing 6 examples from the Indonesian context, namely ethnographic film in the example of the Sukadai from 1974, a short documentary film called Peatlands from 2020 that was aired at an environmental film festival, a multimedia example with Karoni Baroka's Indigenous Species, a poem that integrates other form of media, a music festival with environmental emphasis, Song Angklung Ujo from 2021, which because of the coronavirus had to migrate to an online streaming format for the first time perhaps in its over 50-year existence. A example from social media and the mediation of Titan arum, a very large plant species on YouTube, and specifically time-lapse capture of the flowering of the Titan arum. And the final example of mediated ethnobotany in Indonesia, example of machine learning and artificial intelligence with the catch and release program used by ethnobotanical researchers in Bali. I'll then conclude with some considerations regarding the ethics of mediated ethnobotany in the digital era. So what is ethnobotany? Simply put, it's the study of interactions with and uses of plants in traditional cultures. It comes from the history of American botany and a botanist named Harshberger, who worked with Native American people to identify their traditional knowledge of plants. On the whole, ethnobotany investigates plants as foods, fibers, medicines, materials, ornaments, and spiritual totems. It aims to document traditional knowledge of plants in an era of rapid biodiversity decline, especially of the last few decades. So it brings together botany and the botanical sciences and the social sciences of anthropology, ethnography, participatory research. So an ethnobotanist is trained in both botany as a science and anthropology as a social sciences. So the ethnobotanist will bring techniques such as interviews and focus groups and surveys and questionnaires, that kind of methodology to bear on the study of plants. There's also a technical side of ethnobotany that looks at the active ingredients of plants used in traditional cultures. So what then is mediated ethnobotany? I propose this term as a way to bring together ethnobotany and eco-media studies. All right, so a work of mediated ethnobotany narrates human-plant interactions through some form of eco-media. Now, eco-media is defined as, quote, environmentally engaged film, television, music, visual arts, installation, and conceptual art, as well as work in new media venues like web pages, video games, and mobile operating systems. Now, if you had a video game based on traditional knowledge of plants in Indonesia, some facet of that traditional knowledge, then you could think of that video game as a work of mediated ethnobotany. So mediated ethnobotany increasingly brings new media and social media to bear on ethnobotanical knowledge and ethnobotanical practice. Okay, so I'll now present an overview of examples of what I regard to be mediated ethnobotany in Indonesia, a country of high plant diversity and rapid ecological change due to the pace of industrialization. I'm suggesting here that mediated ethnobotany offers possibilities for preserving traditional knowledge of plants, especially in the light of exponential growth of new and social media in Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries. The same could be said for countries like Myanmar, Vietnam, and others where social media has penetrated to a great extent very quickly. So we need, however, to consider the ethical dimensions of mediated ethnobotany. These include the appropriation of cultural knowledge of plants and also the aestheticization of that cultural knowledge that can underlie the erosion of the knowledge in the long term. Again, I'll talk more about that towards the end of the presentation. The first example I present here is the Sukadai, a 52-minute ethnographic documentary airing in 1974 originally as part of the Disappearing World TV series. The Sukadai people are an ethnic group on the island of Siberut, the northernmost of the Mentawai Islands, about 130 kilometers off the south coast of Sumatra. The documentary records traditional relationships with plants such as the tusi, which purifies the people as they prepare for a ceremony. Around minute 17 of the documentary, you see a procession of people entering a ceremonial area. And as they enter that area, they're calling out to the tusi to purify them. And they can be heard saying, quote, "Tusi stems, as we pass between you, sickness cannot find us, and the voices of those who are hard-hearted will no longer reach us," end quote. Now, a more recent example of mediated ethnobotany in Indonesia is the short documentary film Saving Indonesia's Peatlands, One Pasta at a Time, premiering in 2020 at the Environmental Film Festival, the nation's capital. That's Washington, D.C. Arguably the largest and oldest environmental film festival in the world. This 4-minute film narrates the efforts of ecologically minded entrepreneurs to produce sago pasta from swampy coastal environments impacted by oil palm planting. As a species tolerant of swamps, sago restores the wetland habitat, but also inspires a sustainable cottage industry based on knowledge of the plant as a food and fiber. So the short film is activist, it's also inspirational. It can be considered an account of practical sustainability. However, it can also be regarded as a work of mediated ethnobotany because it narrates these traditional tactile interactions with the sago palm in order to process it into a fiber and food. Now, this is the kind of environment that the kind of coastal wetland, peatland environment that has been cleared in the push towards oil palm production. This is a scene in Riau province in the northern part of Sumatra, actually the coast very close to Singapore. And so these environments have been planted back with swamp tolerant species such as sago, and then these cottage industries have evolved. So 2 examples there from film, short documentary airing at a film festival, and it's sort of a traditional ethnographic, extended ethnographic film aired in the 1970s. So let's look now at our 3rd example, which is a multimedia example. Now, poet Karani Baroka's long poem, Indigenous Species from 2016, is a multimedia work that combines poetry with batik imagery and braille. The poem originated as a spoken word piece, adding yet another dimension to its multimediality. In the poem, a girl is smuggled up a river in Kalimantan through a devastated habitat. Along the way, she reflects on the traditional relationships between people and plants that have also been fractured because of the industrialization of the landscape. And this is an example of the kind of juxtaposition of text and imagery, specifically batik stylizations, that make this such an interesting work of mediated ethnobotany in Indonesia. And we can see in some of the verse that there are indications of ethnobotanical knowledge. So in this passage, the speaker, the narrator, is addressing her captor. So when you wrap chloroform in my mouth, we are drifting past open sores of forest. Pestilent red wounds in the trunks, exposing great-great-grandmotherly rings. The circumferences it takes for rainforest to sprout its many legs of mystery. The soup of complex resilience, rust bucket water feeding ferocity as green gasps wide and devours canopy, the crazy lush of its tickling away into the ocean, end quote. So we see there's intimation of the particular temporal frame occupied by the forest and how that contrasts to the limited temporal purview of industrialization here. And we also have an allusion in that passage to the red wounds in the trunks, perhaps alluding to the sap emitted from certain trees, the same sap that would have been used presumably for medicinal purposes by the indigenous people of the region. And the poem continues in an ethnobotanical fashion. Quote, I would tell you this, but you are already knotting one of my ankles tight to the other. We once let the jungle whittle our lives down to habit. Forest sculpting foraging patterns, spice configurations in soup, longhouse architectural trends, how women live with bleeding, how we can't name what we can't name our children, how we groom the pelts on our bodies. And so the work is very much about those traditional intimate relations between people and plants that help to determine culture, in the way of collaboration and partnership with nature rather than determinism. And so that's why I characterize Kaurani Baroka's long poem as a work of mediated ethnobotany. Now, Baroka's work reminds us that music and performance are vital to the preservation of traditional knowledge of plants in Indonesia and many other countries. Indeed, many indigenous people's songs, for example, as we saw in the ethnographic film Sakade, entreat plants to help humankind in various ways. The song Angklung Ujo, or Nature and Culture in Harmony Music Festival, was founded in 1966 with the aim of preserving the Sundanese arts and culture of West Java. In the light of the coronavirus pandemic in 2021, the festival moved to a live streaming format. So this very recent phenomenon of the online music festival raises the possibility of reaching wider audiences, especially children, about the importance of plants and other elements of nature, their importance to culture, right? So a lot of the traditional songs contain allusions to plants and human relationships to plants. However, the instruments themselves are made from plant materials. And so the instruments themselves encode traditional knowledge of plants that is increasingly eroding as plants are lost due to industrialization, such as for oil palm. Looking towards our fifth example here, in the last decade, time-lapse videos of Sumatra's Titan arum have attracted considerable interest on YouTube and other media sharing platforms. Blooming erratically or unpredictably, the endangered plant has the tallest inflorescence and one of the largest tubers of any plant in the world. It's a remarkably large plant. Some of these time-lapse videos of its flowering have been viewed over 10 million times on YouTube, remarkably demonstrating the public's fascination both with the plant and the imaging technologies that are thought to disclose its behaviors. However, from a mediated ethnobotanical standpoint, these social media narratives tend to conceal indigenous Sumatran interactions with the plants. The videos therefore become forms of mediated botany, fixated on the physiology, on the anatomy of the arum, rather than mediated botany, narrating human relationships to the arum over time. So we can distinguish then between mediated botany, the use of media in botanical research and practice. We can contrast that to mediated ethnobotany that would disclose human relationships to that plant over time. Very important distinction. Now, the sixth and final example is one of machine learning and the catch and release software that has been developed for ethnobotanical research in Bali. Now, catch and release is a new mobile application used by ethnobotanists to bring AI and machine learning to bear on their ethnographic field. That are asked to an interviewee, for example. So this is another case, in my view, of the increasing mediation of the field of ethnobotany, as well as more generally knowledge of human-plant relations in places such as Kirta village, Bali, where Mari Dharmaja is pictured here discussing his detailed knowledge of plants. And so catch and release is an example of a more specialized mode of mediation used by researchers, but one which also allows non-specialists to more efficiently capture and understand interview data. Okay, so those are our 6 examples of mediated ethnobotany. And I've argued that mediated ethnobotany brings ethnobotany into conversation with environmental media studies or eco-media studies, right? So ethnobotany bringing together botany and anthropology, and environmental media studies bringing together media studies and environmental studies. Now we synthesize these two and can talk about mediated ethnobotany, right? Media works that to a great extent deal with human relations to plants. I'm suggesting that this new field offers possibilities for preserving human plant knowledge outside of the specialist discourses of ethnobotany, right? So typically, if an ethnobotanist performed research, it would be published in a specialized journal or as a specialized book for fellow ethnobotanists to read. But what mediated ethnobotany allows is for research and knowledge to penetrate the realm of popular culture and media. So that, for example, you might have an online music festival that has a performance dealing with a particular sacred tree, such as the banyan pictured here on the right. But with this idea, there are certainly ethical considerations, and I'm just flagging a few here. There are probably so many more to consider in detail. The first is the misappropriation of plant wisdom, and that's been an issue for ethnobotany since its earliest publication. Earliest research in the 1890s and through the early 1900s and so on. There's misappropriation of human wisdom involving plants, including the commodification of that wisdom in the form of patented medicines and bioprospecting and so forth. There's also the risk of removing the plant from its biocultural context through these forms of mediation. And we see that, say, with the YouTube time-lapse videos, where we have no sense whatsoever of traditional human relations to that plant, for better or worse, destructive or generative practices pertaining to that plant. We just simply have the plant in its flowering mode, and that's what the medial form is fixated on. We can also problematize truncated narratives, sort of the TikTok version of ethnobotany, if you will, where we get these very abbreviated glimpses of what should otherwise be a very extended narrative of human knowledge about a particular plant. So truncated narrative is a risk. There's also the possible objectification of the plant as a material for human consumption, not as an entity in itself, but as something to be used. And that's a problem that ethnobotany has had to negotiate since its origins, and increasingly in light of post-humanist thought, it has to negotiate even more. To what extent can we think beyond the plant simply for its use value as something to be eaten, drunk, processed, or used in some ceremonial fashion? To what extent can we talk about plants as having their own agency and beingness in the world? So those are possible ethical considerations as forms of ethnobotanical knowledge move increasingly into the world of new and social media. Okay, thank you very much, and I'd be very happy to keep in touch with anyone through email if you're interested in this topic. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. You have just seen and heard the presentations from our speakers. But before we proceed to the open forum, may I just provide you with a recap of their discussion, beginning with Professor Morales. The BCDA is implementing the development of new Clark City from an old Clark City in Pampanga, from 4,400 hectares to 9,450 hectares, encompassing Bamban and Capas Interlock. So using secondary materials that focus on representation, her paper was conceptualized and it is exploratory in nature. Her framework uses Foucault's analysis of power and knowledge. So it begins with the use of a word generator to show differences in representations based on the frequently used words. So from there, she obtained general themes from competing representations from sources, BCDA press releases against online news from mainstream broadcast and print media outlets. The themes include development as smart, resilient, sustainable, and people-centered, exclusion and displacement in development, security as component of development. So hinged on Goal 11 of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, to make cities inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. The image found in all of the BCDA narratives is that the new Clark City is the most inclusive and sustainable, a green city. The indigenous peoples and farmers will benefit from the project with improved access and connectivity. However, the media outlets have said that this is a classic case of development aggression, redirecting rivers to disturb the eco balance, and a case of schizophrenic development. The BCDA says again, there are no declared ancestral domains, but the BCDA has yet to initiate the FPIC, pre-prior informed consent with the NCIP. However, all claimants rejected financial assistance, prompting the BCDA to issue an eviction notice. The BCDA claims they have improved lives through construction work hiring of the ITAs. Okay, there is also payment of $300,000 per hectare, 300,000 pesos. I'm sorry, per hectare of land that is in line for development, and relocation would be made available. It also said that the dispute is not with the BCDA, but with the dispute between indigenous peoples is not with the BCDA, but with the Department of National Defense, since the community and the DND are claiming ownership of the land. There is no mention of where the tribe will be relocated. So in conclusion, Professor Morales said the constant invalidation coming from government agencies on the claims and clamor from ETA communities. There's a constant invalidation coming from government agencies on the claims and clamor from ETA communities. Continuous dismissal of NCIP on the ITA land claims, which makes it easy for BCDA to exclude them. The media remains as a channel to communicate resistance and serve as channel to muted voices so that patches of resistance among indigenous peoples can elicit just, inclusive, and sustainable development. On the part of Dr. Ryan, his papers on mediated ethnobotany that comes in the form of ethnographic film, short documentary, multimedia, music festivals, social media, and machine learning. Ethnobotany, accordingly, is a study of interactions with and uses of plants in traditional cultures. Mediated ethnobotany combines ethnobotany and ecomedia studies in a sort of generative dialogue. Ecomedia takes the form of environmentally engaged film, television, music, visual arts, installation, and conceptual art, including video games. It engages new media and social media to explore the possibilities for preserving traditional knowledge of plants. It also implicates the ethical dimension of traditional knowledge in terms of aestheticization, and appropriation. Some samples of mediated ethnobotany include the Sakudai under the Disappearing World series, Saving Indonesia's Peatlands, where the sago pasta is seen by eco-minded entrepreneurs as more sustainable than the practice of clearing wetlands for palm oil plantations. Multimedia in the poetry of Kairani Baroka, combining batik imagery and braille, depicting traditional intimate relations between people and plants. Music and performance, which is vital to the preservation of traditional knowledge of plants, including the Saung Angklung Ujo, a music festival that began in 1966 and had their online music festival this year in 2021. Allusions to plants and their relationship with humans. So instruments themselves are musical instruments, that is, are made from plant materials. The music encodes traditional knowledge of plants that is increasingly eroding due to industrialization such as for oil palm, okay, the production of oil palm. So social media, such as YouTube, tend to conceal indigenous Sumatran interactions with the plants, as the videos tend to be fixated with the plant's physiology and anatomy. But machine learning, specialized mediation used by researchers to process video interviews and extract text in the field. So knowledge of human and plant relations. So he concluded with ecomedia studies combines botany and anthropology towards preserving human-plant knowledge outside of specialist discourses. Ethical considerations, he said, takes the form of misappropriation of plant wisdom, commodification in the form of patented medicines and bioprospecting, removing the plant from its biocultural context, truncated narratives in ethnobotany, and objectification of plants as material for human consumption. At this point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm checking the time. It's 2:05 p.m. We now open the floor for the open forum. But unfortunately, I think that Dr. Ryan is not around. And unfortunately as well, I am not competent enough to respond to your questions, nor am I plantito enough. Unless there's somebody in the audience who can respond to the questions directed to Dr. Ryan. But I think that Professor Janice Morales is here with an equally engaging topic that, and she's here to respond to your questions. So do we have questions from the audience, please? Questions from the audience? You can type your questions on the chat box, or you can raise your hand. Okay. I think the audience is warming up. I suppose it's incumbent upon me to get the ball rolling. Professor Morales, hello, good afternoon. Yeah, she's here with us. Okay.
Afternoon, everyone.
Yes, ma'am. I think that what you just presented to us are two different discursive formations. If we follow the thoughts of Michel Foucault, one is emanating from institutions such as the government through the BCDA, and civil society, on the other hand, through mainstream media. Apparently, if we follow Foucault, mainstream media is apparently undermining the discursive formation of BCDA by and through alternative framing. So what could you infer initially from this? So you did mention too about subsequent analytical tools. So for instance, what more information could be obtained beyond these media reproductions if we also follow Michel Foucault's archaeology of knowledge?
Okay, so the idea of using the power knowledge of Foucault has something to do with trying to look at patches of resistance, no, in terms of the community, because I do believe, no, that when you look at the press releases of BCD, those media releases are also used by the media outlets. No, sometimes correspondents would ask for information to government offices, particularly those who are proposing projects, no, to get information about the the project. So my worry when I created this paper is the fact that what kind of information is being released, no, particularly by the proponent, and in what sense do the media outlets make sense of it, no? And what I see as a what I see as a contribution of media, no, in this particular topic of the AITA community and the NCCA is that at some point they provided an avenue, no, as you have mentioned, an alternative discourse for the community and even, no, the scientific community as well, no, to air their position or claim in terms of what is happening in terms of the development of the new Clark City. So I see the what do you call it? I see the importance, no, of the role of media here as an institution in giving us an alternative in terms of the facts or informations that we need to know in terms of the position, no, or yes, the situation of the AITA community, particularly on developments such as this one.
Oh.
I do hope I did
Yeah.
answer the question.
Yes, ma'am. I also wonder about the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Act. I mean, it is my impression that the NCIP would tend um, to look favorably, if you will,
Yeah.
on the situation of Indigenous peoples. And yet, your paper mentioned that they have not acted on the petition of the NCIP for the awarding or the grant of an ancestral domain title. What could possibly be the motivation as far as the NCIP behind this position? Behind this position, as far as the AITA Indigenous peoples are concerned?
Not to malign, no, the NCIP as an agency, but when we go to the field, no, this is separate from the paper that I did presented. No, when I did go to the field, the community really don't know anything about the project. No, they just see it as there's some construction near their community. No? And a lot of them would share that NCIP did not have any consultation with them. Those are the AITAs in Santa Juliana, Capas. Because we're talking about a large area here, different tribes of AITAs do have different issues as well. So I think the position of NCIP has something to do with the dispute between the claim of the AITA community and Santa Juliana, which is where the DND also do have their military installation right now. In fact, when we went there, it's so strict, no? When we entered the community, because they're undergoing they're undergoing military operations, no, under the visiting force agreement in there. So there are exercises. So, however, that's my point. No, they're trying to make it technical in saying that there is no title or the ancestral domain claim was not granted. But I've been this particular paper is so personal to me because one of the hometown of my parents is Barangay Aranguren, Capas, no, which is part of the NCC project, and I did grow up seeing the Aita community there. No? So therefore, my point is when you look at claims, no, well, probably they don't have yet, no, the ancestral claim title, but they've been there, no, even prior to the development. So if we want development to be inclusive, let's not be technical in trying to look at claims, no. And another is the fact that it's really a political issue, no, when you look at the Aita communities. One, because there are different tribes that are involved, and then there are different areas as well, no. It covers Mabalacat City in Pampanga, and then areas in Banban and Capas. So I would suggest that probably other researchers would look at the differences as well, no, on the claims and at the same time on the needs of the different tribes of the Aita community there, because they have different issues depending on where they are in the area of development. No? So I think in all fairness, because I just focuses on the text, no? The reason why, in my conclusion, those are all coming from the media, or the news, no? But to be fair about it, I think NCIP is also in communication with other areas, such as those Aita in Kalamitan. No? So they are in communication with other Aita tribe, but that's the sad part. Not everyone is informed about the project, or they do know about it. No. In fact, the displacement of farmers in Santa Juliana because of the military practices out there, no, it's not even visible in newspapers. No. So that's the reason why I did have an interest in trying to look at media representation here.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. I think we have some points raised from the chat box. Coming from Twinkle Ferraran. Is anyone doing research on indigenous? Okay. This is directed to Dr. Ryan, but I will just read the question. Okay. Is anyone doing research on indigenous Philippine medicinal plants and properties also? And if ever, with all the talks on globalization or being connected with the SDG, and being considered developed, how can we further integrate indigenous knowledge and research with our present days and ways of living? Example, the indigenous have their own way of protecting themselves and, let's say, don't believe in vaccines. We don't have to force them to do that, and who's to say that our method is better than theirs? So there's always a lack of education or information sharing. But responsible information sharing, because I understand a lot of abuse has also been done before. To Professor Morales, from Professor Ayo Hularbal, the existence of contrasting views on land claims already shows an absence of a total FPIC. Why was this not brought up in the clinic?
Honestly, I'm not privy who is helping them, no, particularly the Hangi tribe. As I've mentioned, I only look at the text, no, of the interviews coming from the different media outlets with the Hangi tribe, no, who have ancestral claim to within, no, the NCC. But yeah, yes, it's true, no. They already violated FPIC, considering that even in the area in Santa Juliana where we went, no, there's really no idea about what is happening around them, no, and how it will affect their livelihood, such as farming, in the development of the new Clark City.
Thank you. We have a comment from Twinkle Ferrarin. Lost connection. The ITAs also don't agree with the smart city. I visited a few years ago and spoke to them. Or maybe it's because they also don't fully understand what exactly is going to happen. And maybe like because of lack of education. 300,000 per hectare or whatever the figure was may sound like a big amount, but then if they can't do financial management, then that can be gone so quick. So what can also help them with stuff like that? Professor Morales?
That's a challenging question, no? In fact, that's the burden if you are a researcher. Where do you go from here, no? After looking at it, after interviewing people, particularly the IPs. I think the reason why I also posted this particular topic that focuses on media representation is the fact that there is really lack of information. I don't know if which institution should be responsible, no, in giving them such information. And not to mention that it's not even a question about how big the money is when you're talking about the 300,000 per hectare compensation, because we know exactly that they are tied up with their land, no? That their identity as a community is really neatly tied, no, with the land where they are in. So for me, it's not even a question of how will they manage the money, no, or it's a good compensation or not, but letting them be involved in the decision-making process of such kind of development. That's the kind of inclusive type of development for me. No, if during the planning probably of the NCC that all these tribes were consulted, no, and exactly I don't see in the master plan where will you put them. No, I would see facilities such as sports facilities, government facilities, which they will be putting in the NCC project, but I don't see in the master plan. Do they have any Aita village there where our Aita community can still continue with their lives, particularly the kind of livelihood that they are into. So it's really a very political um, issue, no? And I cannot answer whose institution or which institution no, should step up when we're talking about this one. And I think NCIP really is crucial, no, in pushing for the rights of the IPs in the NCC project.
Yes, ma'am. So here, to push the point further, here in the Cordilleras, we have seen the IPRA process. We've seen the IPRA process, and some indigenous peoples, they have non-government organizations that are coordinating the educational aspect of the process with them. I wonder in your area if there are non-government organizations that are that are coordinating this in order to elicit, not just educate, elicit generational memory from them. Because I understand, I've read somewhere that in the old Clark, the old Clark City, a lot of Aita communities have been displaced and they have not been compensated. I wonder if this information in your fieldwork are coming out and adds up to the narrative in order to help in their cause, so to speak.
Yes. I did encounter some NGOs when I look at online materials now, but what I did is to just zero in on the news so that I would at some point avoid biases, no? Because probably when you get information, for example, or text coming from organizations, definitely they have advocacies. The reason why I did intentionally not include them in my analysis and just focus on the media. But I think there are, no? I'm not sure who are these people, but there are NGOs who are also helping the community.
We have another question from the chat box from Professor Holarbal. Dr. Morales, is there a media outlet in Pampanga headed by the indigenous community or one that directly involves them? Just curious. And another question, and a follow-up to that, because the flow of media discourse still tends to marginalize the Aita as muted voices that require mediation. Are there efforts to encourage indigenous communities to voice out based on their own terms?
I'm not sure of existing efforts that would help them to voice out. And I think there is this one that I encountered when I look or browse at the materials online that are directly involved, or their advocacy is to at some point make the Aita community there visible. They are releasing it's called Likas News, no? They are releasing featured materials or featured article of the Aita community. But aside from that, I have no knowledge of any, who are involved in including, it's true, that there is really a need as well to include them, to produce informations for their community as well, because definitely particularly the mainstream media outlets is also limited when you're talking about how are they going to involve the Aita community in producing such information.
Um, I wonder, Professor Morales, if the mainstream media, for instance, Inquirer, and obtain their information from the community itself, or is there any other source that, aside, of course, from the fact that I understand BCDA will send in press releases and they will tend to verify that, but mostly, where do they obtain their sources of information?
Based from all the texts that I've read, no, they are basically interviewing people from the ITA community, no, and of course, as I've mentioned, they also interview scientific communities, no, who are involved in the research, such as UP, for example, and University of Glasgow, no. Because I think if Inquirer or other media outlets did not release such kind of information, where will we get it? No, if we are lay persons, we cannot get it. We cannot easily access it. No, if you're not a member of the academy. So, on that note, I think they still have an important part, no, in trying to give us information about the project.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Time check at this point is 2:25 p.m. We have 5 minutes left in our session, unless there are more questions coming from the audience. Are there any more questions coming from the audience for Professor Morales? Okay, at this point, I wish to announce that the next panel from here is panels 5 to 8. The session would be from 2:30 to 4 o'clock p.m. Please check your kits for the links. Unless there are further questions, your presence in this panel, panel 2, Indigenous Peoples and Sustainable Development Goals in Southeast Asian Media, is very much appreciated. Thank you all for being here, the 23 participants in these Zoom sessions, and the audience in the other platforms, Facebook and YouTube. I suppose at this point, I wish to thank Dr. Janice Morales for that engaging presentation and conversation with her. I thank too Dr. John Charles Ryan for sending us his presentation on ethnobotany. Yeah, unfortunately, we were not able to process the discussion in his absence. So, ladies and gentlemen, that ends our breakout session for panel 2 today. Thank you, everyone, for your active participation. I wish to thank our speakers as well for the knowledge that they have imparted, which will surely enrich our awareness of the subject matter, all oriented towards the attainment of sustainable development goals, which is the abiding theme of this conference. Thank you very much. See you in the other panels. Thank you.